Good morning. Welcome back to day 2 of Mountain Connect. We're very honored this morning to have Senator Hickenlooper joining us from Washington, D.C. Good morning, Senator Hickenlooper. How are you?
I'm doing great. Are you all set up?
We can't hear him.
How about, hey, Jess? They can't hear me.
Hey, Senator Hickenlooper, this is Jeff Gavlinski, CEO of Mountain Connect. Again, very honored to have you speak with our audience today. And thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. As you might guess, there's been a great deal of energy and interest around BEAD here at the conference. And given the recent NOFO announcement, we're very excited to have you. But I'm very interested in the NET Act because the supply chain issues have been top of mind here as well. So would you please explain the Network Equipment Transparency Act, and assuming this passes the full Senate, how this may make our telecom supply chain more efficient over time?
Sure, and I think this is all part of that larger effort to once and for all. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
To make sure once and for all that we do connect all of America to high-speed internet. Because as long as we end up having isolated towns and farmhouses that aren't connected, we create barriers to what this country really needs right now, especially considering the invasion in Ukraine, but the unity. And I think that our effort with the Network Equipment Transparency Act was just a small step to basically increase the understanding of the health of the broadband supply chain. And obviously we want to make sure that these critical broadband programs, the federal programs, stay on schedule. The NET Act passed the Senate Commerce Committee unanimously, so we will get to a full vote here in the near future. But it really does shine a light on the supply chain disruptions that are impacting broadband infrastructure projects. The broadband deployment projects depend on the availability of certain raw materials, certain manufactured goods. It's all, you put that together and that's what a supply chain is. And I think, semiconductors, routers, fiber optic cables, they're all part of this. And we want to make sure that the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, has to monitor and make sure that they detect problems long before they become crises. And in that monitoring, that they inform Congress of any supply chain challenges that could have an effect, an impact, actually harm the federally funded broadband projects. And Senator Moran, who's from Kansas, Senator Capito from West Virginia, Senator Tester from Montana are all the original co-sponsors.
Yeah, so as a follow-up question, how concerned are you longer term about supply chain issues impacting BEAD-funded projects?
So I think this is an issue that we have to address as a country. We switched, and this was part of globalization, we switched to, instead of having inventories of almost all essential components of any climate supply chain, we switched to just in time. And it is an efficiency. You get more profit for every company. I understand that. What we're going to have to do now is go back over those places where the pandemic demonstrated interruptions can cause vast downstream consequences. And I think that's just a big part of what we've got to, as a country, address is where do we need to make sure we have some backup, some ability within providers in the supply chains that they can step up production rapidly when that's needed for whatever reason. It could be a flood, a fire, a pandemic, a war. Obviously, a lot of basically challenges that could come our way.
Great. I'm going to follow up with and take this in a little bit of a different direction for you, because I know you've been actively involved in supporting BEAD. How do we ensure, and this is really a question geared towards and focused on Colorado, but how do we ensure our economically challenged communities within our larger Colorado cities receive equitable access and opportunities for improved broadband network infrastructure?
Sure, and that's a question not only for Colorado, but for the whole country. I think there's an awareness now that as we grow our economy and solve problems within that economy, we want to do so in a way that is more equitable and expands jobs for everybody, creates opportunity for everybody, and especially make sure that we connect with everybody. We support the White House. I joined Biden in the announcement. It was one of those rare things where I'm like the oldest freshman senator. I'm not in history, but I'm one of the oldest, having been a mayor and a governor. And I was one of the only senators who was able to get to the White House then. But we had 20 leading internet providers there. Basically, you added them up, it was over 80% of the providers for the entire country. These leading providers all made a commitment they would increase internet speeds and or cut prices, in many cases both. And these are going to offer what have been designated as an affordable connectivity program eligible households, high speed and high quality internet for no more than $30 a month. And this is the kind of commitment that great countries can make, where the business community steps up with the government, and not just federal government, the state government, the local government, whether you're in rural areas, but also in urban areas. How do we make this work? And the program's funded by $14.2 billion from the Affordable Connectivity Program. It was part of that bipartisan infrastructure bill. It's funny, Joe Manchin, the first time I got to Washington after the election, he had me on his boat and wanted to probe whether I was sufficiently bipartisan. Because he was at that time putting together this idea of a bipartisan infrastructure bill. And we got to I ended up being one of the 20 people that helped put that together in the Senate. And 10 Democrats, 10 Republicans working together, that's how Congress is supposed to succeed. Anyway, from that bill, there's, at the White House announcement, you can go to Get Internet, so GETINTERNET, I'm dyslexic, so I have to spell those out, getinternet.gov to sign up to get more information.
Thank you. So when you were governor, it's really interesting that this conference, the roots of this conference is embedded in and around the ARRA-funded grant that the state of Colorado received back in 2009, 2010. And this is a question I asked of Senator Bennett yesterday, and as well I asked Alan Davidson while he was here. But I would like to ask you the same question. The problem with the ARRA-funded grant that we had really falls on lack of oversight. So during this BEAD funding process, how do we ensure that we have the proper level of oversight so that we don't repeat history?
Sure, and that is one of our big challenges, and I think that we all share the responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen again. I think I have always, while I was mayor of Denver, I could see it on the local level. When I was governor, I could see it on the state level. And now I'm at the federal level, so I feel an even greater responsibility to figure this out, that how do we not spend large amounts of tax dollars and not get what we want? And I think that that's part of what we discussed specifically in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, that we believe local communities know their own needs better than state government. And the broadband equity access and deployment program, what's that come out to? BEAD, B-E-A-D. Again, these acronyms drive me nuts. But it states that in the director's chair, in the driver's seat to close connectivity gaps. No matter where a household is located, we want to make sure that we work with local governments to figure out how to make sure that there is connectivity there. And I think the rules and applications for BEAD, I think they've been released. They came out last week, or maybe the week before last. But have no doubt, the Colorado Broadband Office is going to do everything humanly possible to make sure that we reach our most underserved communities. And I think Governor Polis has put together a good team there. I think we've given them the funding. I don't think we've got any excuses. So hopefully I can come back and talk to you in 2 years or 4 years, and we can all pat each other on the back and say we got it right finally. I think the NTIA has checks and balances to make sure that funding goes where it's needed most. But in the end, the design was to make sure that local communities have responsibility for the delivery of these programs, ultimately.
Well, so I'd like to end on a personal note. So I wanted to know if you're still carrying around that Remington bronze that we gave you 4 or 5 years ago.
Of course I am. Are you kidding me? As you go through these jobs, and I've been so lucky to, I mean, I'd never run for anything when I ran for mayor and won. And this notion, when I ran for mayor, I said that the city of Denver is a part of the whole metro area. And when I ran for governor, I said that the metropolitan Denver area is a part of the whole state of Colorado. We've been continually trying to build, the sense of unity within the state of Colorado. Now I'm trying to do that in the U.S. Senate, a little bigger task. But anyway, you get given lots of recognitions of the time you put in, the effort, the times you went out trying to make money when everybody else was out trying to make money. Anyway, the Remington is beautiful, sits on my desk to this day. It's not in my desk here in Washington, D.C. It's in my desk in my house in Denver, but my home office. And it's one of the, there's only a handful that you actually take, and the nice thing from your point of view, I look at it and I remember exactly where it came from and appreciate all the work you guys are doing to make sure that we do get everyone connected.
Well, thank you again, Senator Hickenlooper. I know we're out of time with you. We really appreciate you joining us today, and hopefully we'll get a chance to see you in person in the future. Thank you.
You bet. I apologize not being there, in person, but this is just the world I live in. But I'll be back there in person, I promise.
It's great to see you again. Thank you.
You bet. Nice to see you.
So now I would like to call to the stage an old friend of the conference. He is now our State Attorney General, a very wise and forthright man, our Attorney General, State Attorney General Phil Weiser, who's going to talk to us along with Jessica Deere about digital access law. Did I get that correct?
Close enough.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Hi. So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first full session of the day, Broadband, Digital Rights, and the Law. We've decided to try and talk about everything in 1 hour, I think. My name is Jessica Deere, and I'm new here, as you can tell by my heels, straight from Washington.
Next time, Jessica will be here in jeans.
Next time I'll be here in jeans. And I'm the director of Ranking Digital Rights, a nonprofit, nonpartisan, public interest research program that's based at a think tank called New America in Washington, D.C. In our work at RDR, we focus on big tech and the impact companies like Meta and Apple, Google, Twitter, Microsoft, Amazon, and a bunch of companies from outside the U.S. have on our information environment and on our civil and human rights by evaluating their publicly available terms of service, privacy policies, and other essential policies. We evaluate them against a set of rigorous standards in 3 categories: governance, freedom of expression and information, and privacy. We then rank the companies accordingly, and we just released this year's results in our Big Tech Scorecard last month, and the news isn't so good. For the 6th year in a row, no company that we evaluate earns a passing grade. You can take a look at the rankings at rankingdigitalrights.org, And I'll just give you a quick note that Twitter got the highest score and Amazon ranked last, but neither of them have data breach protocols that anybody can access and learn about what happens in the event of a data breach. That was an interesting point that we found out. So after hearing me speak at one of Drew Clark's famous broadband breakfasts late last year, Doug Adams and Jeff very kindly invited me to speak at Mountain Connect, and I immediately said yes, not really knowing what I was getting myself into, because I love a challenge and really an opportunity to see how people elsewhere are grappling with internet issues. I spent my first 12 years in this space founding and running a digital rights organization in the Middle East, and I've also experienced firsthand just how terrible and expensive rural internet can be in coastal Maine, where I spend time every summer. So I have sort of the whole spectrum from access to the company policies. And I really enjoyed the discussions here at Mountain Connect and how sort of unabashedly technical they can get and into the weeds, and also just sort of the dogged focus that I see on bridging the digital divide and serving people. And it gives me a lot of hope in an internet policy world that can be quite depressing sometimes for me. I feel like y'all get to focus on the promise of the internet where we're focused on evaluating the risk. And so in this session, I want to take us to a little bit of a higher altitude. I certainly am not an expert in broadband development, so I'm not going to talk about what I don't know. And I'm hoping that Phil and I can have a conversation about sort of what we can think about in terms of policy innovation to go along with the broadband development and the infrastructure bill. You know, and sort of look at a broader spectrum of internet-related issues to spur some thoughts about our digital futures beyond providing more reliable, affordable, and secure access, as you all do. And so while broadband has become essential to work, school, health, entertainment, and our political process, it's also enabled just by allowing such a huge scale and volume of internet traffic and so many people getting online before we've actually grappled with a lot of the dilemmas that arise. And I just wanted us to sort of spend a little bit of time thinking about what those dilemmas are. Information overload, which sort of requires a lot more digital literacy, broadband, and has really enabled the big data era since about the mid-2010s, allowing companies to collect vast amounts of data, process them through algorithms, serve ads, filter us into filter bubbles, et cetera. Cloud services now, also enabled by broadband, encourage us to store our data and essential documentation and all work and all kinds of other things in the cloud, but often don't tell us what will happen to that information. Is it encrypted? What will happen in the event of a data breach, et cetera. It also makes it easier for young people or even older people to become more addicted to social media platforms and the kinds of videos and sort of virality that we see. In addition, state and local governments are now procuring technologies that are making decisions for us about our benefits, the criminal justice system, transportation, and they're collecting data as they do it, they're sharing data with companies, and we need to make sure that we know that they're making good decisions, that they're making human decisions. We also can't do anything online without being bombarded by ads that seem to know just not what we've searched for, but what we just talked about. I know we've all had that moment of like, wait a minute, I was just talking about that. Video doorbells, also something that wouldn't be possible without broadband internet, helping solve crime, but also potentially creating a culture where we're surveilling our neighbors, compressing further what little space we have these days for private thoughts and actions. So we talk here about broadband as a great connector, but we also need to address the potential harms and devise sort of sound strategies for mitigating them. And several times here I've heard, and just even in the last session, discussion of not wanting to make the same mistakes again. And that narrative in the policy arena is that big tech and the tech companies have gone unregulated for far too long, and that we have not focused on policy innovation to complement our technology innovation over the last quarter century. So in short, we need to spend much more time on innovating policy solutions to the technologies we build and deploy as much time as we do on the technologies and the delivery infrastructure. And the question that we ask at RDR, and that I want to pose today, is how do we take advantage of the amazing opportunities that broadband creates for us to connect to other people, communities, institutions, organizations, but without sacrificing our civil and human rights, without being dehumanized by the technologies themselves and the corporations and the institutions that we interact with, and without even dehumanizing ourselves. So I'm really honored today to discuss some of these issues with Colorado's 39th Attorney General, Phil Weiser. As I'm sure many of you know, Attorney General Weiser has dedicated his life to the law, justice, and public service, and before running for office, served as the Hatfield Professor of Law and Dean of the University of Colorado Law School, where he founded Silicon Flatiron Center for Law, Technology, and Entrepreneurship, and co-chaired the Colorado Innovation Council. So, Phil, it's great to be here with you today.
Thanks for joining us.
Well, so excited. So to get us started, maybe just to level set a little bit, can you outline for us what an Attorney General's role is in sort of determining and implementing internet and technology policy at the state level?
So I've got a few answers to this question. First, for this group, everything is technology policy. If you care about education, if you care about healthcare, if you care about public safety, you better be thinking about technology. So if you're an Attorney General and you're not thinking about technology, then you're not going to effectively solve the critical challenges of the 21st century. And here in Colorado, you might add water to that list, where we're building smarter and more effective measurement and management systems in an era of scarcity and drought. So that's my first answer. My second answer is the world that people are living in is increasingly an online world. When you talk about the challenges of today, and you've adverted to this, I'm going to pick one example which is on my mind because of two things that happened yesterday. One, as I was visiting a school in Golden. The second was the tragic mass shooting in Texas. Young people are facing challenges around mental health that are like never before. And many people here I know have seen the movie The Social Dilemma. Others have read authors on this. The experience of young people on fill in the platform, TikTok, Instagram, having algorithms drive them into a deeper and deeper hole, thinking about dark thoughts, is something we've got to reckon with. The fact that young people are now getting access to deadly drugs, think fentanyl, on social media platforms is something we have to reckon with. So first, if you care about public policy, you better be thinking about technology. Second, if you care about people, you better be looking at the challenges they're facing, which, as you adverted to, may arise out of technology. And third, it's personal to me. My career, and the reason I've been a regular here, is because I am passionate about digital equity and opportunity for all. I believe in entrepreneurship and innovation. And rather than have the law be an impediment, I want to make sure we're doing everything we can to enable digital equity, the benefits of this incredible transformation. And I think during the pandemic, people who were talking about why everyone needs broadband could not have been proven more right. We scrambled with some, call it, Band-Aids here and there. We had a consent decree with T-Mobile. We made them do hotspots in areas where young people were not able to be online learning. But it's unacceptable that not everyone has access to robust broadband. That's something I've worked on my whole career, and it's personal to me.
Thanks. So, talking about the Bridge Act and the BEAD program and all of the infrastructure, broadband infrastructure bill or law now that's coming, and that's on everybody's minds here, what is your role in sort of the state's submission to that program, and how can Colorado and other states actually take best advantage of that program, in your opinion?
So you mentioned I was co-chair of the Colorado Innovation Council, and that was 2007, 15 years ago. And I was, at that moment, working with others, working to prepare for the possibility there'd be federal support for broadband. How do we take advantage of it? It's fair to say that Colorado's efforts at that time were not A+. This time, I really want us to do better. The way we do better is we're all in this work together. I know you've had people from the governor's broadband office here. I know Tony Neal Graves has been a wonderful leader. We are the partner. And here's what lies ahead. And I think that's probably been covered a little bit. The FCC will release a map that we all know will be significantly flawed because it will be based on flawed data. That's where our work, and by that I mean the Attorney General's office work, is going to be center stage. We're in the midst now of hiring someone whose number 1, 2, and 3 job will be to make sure we get the best case we can to push back on the inaccuracies. Because how much money we get in Colorado depends on how much unserved territory we have. How much unserved territory we have depends on our ability to marshal the on-the-ground evidence to push back on the map, first at the FCC, then at NTIA. So that's part 1. Part 2, of course, is we get the money. We need to make sure, as it is put to work, that the right set of actors have been lined up and that there's effective oversight to ensure that they're doing what they said they would. And this truly once-in-a-generation opportunity is one that we seize completely.
So how does that mapping, just to go a little bit further into the mapping, how does that sort of practically take place? Who will provide the data that is the reliable data?
So what we're going to need, and I know the governor and the Colorado Broadband Office are working on this, is our own crowdsourced data that we can bring to bear to challenge, I'll call it the notional map. And when we get that crowdsourced data, and I'll just give you one example. So Rod Lenz is the chair of the Republican River District. He lives outside Yuma, Colorado, and he will say he can't do a Zoom call at his home. He has to go into town. You can imagine the challenges that created for Rod during the pandemic. It's possible that his local provider will say, oh yeah, we provide him broadband service. We need people like Rod raising their hand saying, not in my community, or maybe occasionally I will get some minimally acceptable level, but not consistently robust.
And I know one of the other things that you're concerned about is sort of holding providers accountable for what they're delivering sort of after, I suppose, after the implementation. And one of the themes of Alan Davidson's talk yesterday was also transparency in sort of the delivery of the program or the awards of the program, and also sort of what is returned as a result of those awards. I'm wondering what your role and sort of how that accountability mechanism, how do you see it working?
So one of the core functions of our office that I've been talking about is we're the lawyer for the state of Colorado. So as we take on this challenge, this broadband challenge, we are the lawyer working hand in hand with the broadband office. We are also the lawyer for the people of Colorado. And a core responsibility we have is consumer protection. Any business who tells customers, I promise you I will do X, Y, and Z, and proceeds not to do X, Y, and Z, can be held to account by us. We have a website called stopfraudcolorado.gov. If you have been the victim of a deceptive or unfair trade practice, we want to know about it. 2 quick examples, and I'll get to your question. Just recently, TurboTax, offering what they marketed as a convenient and free online service, proceeded to charge people. We got $2.5 million back to Colorado consumers. Thank you. And closer to the topic of this conference, CenturyLink said, we're giving you a price lock guarantee. He stole my punchline. Except the price wasn't locked. They kept raising their fee. We got $8 million back to Colorado consumers. It is important to recognize that price is only one half of the equation. The other is quality, or another way to say it is price, adjusted for quality. If you say we're giving you, pick your number, 50 megabits per second that we're going to get download speeds, and you make a guarantee, and you actually get get 10 megabits per second, that's deceptive. That's illegal. We will hold you to account.
So assuming everything goes swimmingly and the unserved and underserved are served, and throughout that process, you've mentioned the importance of digital literacy to the success of the broadband initiative. And I'm wondering if you could talk about the different aspects of digital literacy that you're thinking about, and sort of how you see programs for digital literacy sort of complementing the rollout.
Another answer to your question, Phil, as an Attorney General, why are you so focused on broadband, is because my view of the world is not necessarily there are Democrats and Republicans. There's innovation and there's inertia. Most of government goes on inertia. How did we do things before? I am all in the innovation camp. And here's a critical innovation challenge. There are many Coloradans, often who are older Coloradans, sometimes who have lower socioeconomic status, sometimes who might be in more remote areas, who are not literate, who are not familiar with the emerging technologies of our time, which could be having a broadband connection, telemedicine, online banking, et cetera, et cetera. If you are not part of that broadband internet economy, you are at a severe disadvantage. In some cases, it's quite literal. If you don't do online banking, many banks will say, I'm going to charge you a monthly fee for a paper statement. And for people who already may not be as well off and who aren't online and are getting these paper fees because they're not doing it online, boy, that is, to me, a real squeeze. So what do we do to help people? We're going to need a digital literacy corps. Think of like AmeriCorps type programs, whose job it is to ask people, do you have access to broadband? Because increasingly, there are programs to make it so affordable that I don't think affordability is going to be the big issue. It's going to be adoption from whatever word you want to use, digital literacy perspective or know-how. And so we need to lean into this challenge and think about this challenge of how we create opportunity. And anyone who's interested in thinking about this, please let me know. Our office is going to be looking at this. How do we support, enable, and drive this digital literacy on-the-ground program supporting those who aren't currently connected but who are worse off for it?
That's a big challenge. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things I heard repeated a few times yesterday was this desire not to repeat past mistakes. And as I mentioned also, just that in the first 25 years or so of the internet, there was probably not enough regulation. Sort of corporate tech companies have been allowed to sort of proliferate and build and move fast and break things was the mantra. Now they say that's not the mantra anymore, but it's hard to tell with the amount of lobbying that they're doing to actually sort of prevent regulation from coming. And so I'm wondering, in terms of policy innovation, and with the new infrastructure program that's really meant to bring so many more people online, make sure everyone can connect, what should we be looking for in terms of policy innovation, including regulation, so that we can build in parallel with better networks, a safer and healthier information environment? What measures should we take with regard to privacy and data protection? And also, please talk about what other measures you've already taken and sort of what's happening now with the Colorado privacy law.
How long do I have for that?
Well, until people want to start asking questions, we will have Q&A. So.
All right. So first, I want to say, with all respect and deep affection for our wonderful senators, Washington, D.C. is currently not really functioning in a effective manner to solve problems. I just want to give you the story around data privacy. So I'm working for President Obama on technology innovation issues. We did manage to get some important things accomplished, including a law that freed up wireless spectrum and created some funding for public safety. But the painful story of data privacy was we worked on a privacy bill of rights that was going to help give consumers more choice, awareness in how their data is being collected and used. That was a decade ago. It still hasn't passed. What I would say is, and I think here I'm speaking to the choir, we need to focus on our state and local opportunities to solve problems together, because here in Colorado, at the state and local level, we have a high-functioning government working together to solve problems. In the data privacy area, we have a Colorado Privacy Act. It was passed unanimously in our state Senate. And we worked to develop the right approach, and our approach will be a little different than California's. The high-level explanation I'd offer is we're going to probably be more principle-based and less prescriptive, for example, mandating specific technologies. The nature of this law is really important for everyone here to understand, and anyone who wants to talk to me afterwards on this law, I'd love the opportunity. You can go to coag.gov/privacy, and you'll see more details. We are currently in an informal consultation stage, and then we will have a formal rulemaking that will happen this fall. And the core promise here is to give consumers basic control over their data. What information is being collected about you? Is it true? Are you okay with it being shared to other people? Do businesses have to actually assess what data they're collecting and ask themselves, is it necessary? And when you get those protections, we believe you are going to not necessarily have your information being trafficked in ways you don't know is happening. And for many of us, I think there's a creepy factor that our information's getting all out there without us approving it or knowing about it. And this law will give consumers those basic rights. In terms of other issues, let me highlight that the social media ones I mentioned earlier are really on my mind. We issued a report in their office yesterday about teen mental health. We're investigating Instagram and TikTok, and the other world I live in, not just the Colorado world, but state AGs, is also high-functioning and bipartisan. We have almost every AG in that investigation asking, how is it that you are providing services to kids using algorithms that you know are harming them and not stopping it? We got to protect our kids in this environment. And so we're working hard on those issues as well. And finally, on competition issues, this is where I spent a lot of my career, I am going to keep pushing for action at the federal level. I do believe we need some type of an internet platform agency that can oversee these really dominant platforms that have such significance in our economy and democracy. Michael Bennet proposed such a bill, which is an important driver to a conversation, but we are in the early innings of that. And when I look back at what happened on privacy, nothing for a decade, I'm not optimistic. So what's happening on the competition? Well, we're leading a case against Google. We're very involved in another one against Facebook. It's really important that companies with monopoly power are not able to exclude rivals and harm consumers, and that's why we're pushing those cases forward.
And I'm curious, do you have any hope that there will be federal privacy legislation passed in this session?
Hope springs eternal. I wouldn't be here without hope. I will hold on to hope because we can't lose faith that our great democratic republic will regain the capacity to make thoughtful public policy at the federal level. We need a functioning federal government. We don't have that at this point, but we have to keep hope alive. And
in addition to sort of Colorado needing to have its own privacy law in the absence, I think, of a federal privacy law, I'm wondering, have you seen, I'm wondering what the economic implications might be, or if you've thought about them for not having federal privacy legislation, and also, just as a compound kind of question, if and when federal privacy legislation does come through, what kinds of conflicts or what will happen with sort of myriad state privacy laws versus a federal one, and what's happening to reconcile that, if anything?
So my view is that we in Colorado will have the best privacy law, and the federal government will copy it. And we've done it before. John Hickenlooper was just on. We developed these methane protections that were really smart and effective to address methane emissions from oil and gas production. The EPA's like, man, you in Colorado, you brought the industry to the table with environmentalists, figured out a great set of protections. They literally adopted our regulations wholesale. That's what we're going to do in privacy. We're going to do something that I believe will be really well done. And if they change a little bit here and there, I can live with that. What I have said is a single federal standard for protecting consumer privacy makes so much more sense than having individual state standards. We are in a second best world where only the states are able to address this. So I'm a realist, I'll live in that world. But when the federal government can pass a privacy law, they can preempt, as long as they adopt something as good as what we have, I'm okay being preempted. But here's what I would say. I really need authority as the Attorney General of Colorado to enforce federal law. Because what I could not accept is having a nominal federal law where Colorado's law has now been preempted and Colorado lacks any authority to protect our citizens. And there's lots of precedents for this. The Dodd-Frank law gives state AGs the ability to protect consumers under a federal law, and it preempts state law.
Fantastic. Switching gears just a little bit, I know one of the things that's also on your mind is sort of state and local procurement of technologies. And I'm wondering, what do you see as the issues there? Is it a matter of sort of establishing rules for procurement or education of certain offices, of officials, and sort of what is the AG's office role there, and sort of what do you project in sort of state and local government sort of, procuring different technologies that are algorithmically driven and otherwise, and how that can affect services and people's rights?
So first I'd say we in the state of Colorado need to eat our own dog food, which is to say we can't tell people, oh, businesses, you need to be thinking about how you manage your data, protecting your consumers, but we as a state, we can basically ignore these issues. We can't say to businesses, you have to think about algorithms you're using and are they fair or are they hurting consumers? But we as a state, we don't need to think about it. We put together in our office we call it an impact team, where the technologists who protect the data in our department, those who represent state agencies and their management of data, and those who oversee private sector data, they all are working together. They're all in dialogue with one another. So as we as a state have any contracts where we are collecting, managing data, where we are analyzing data and using algorithms to make decisions, we need to be mindful. And one of the risks, particularly for state and local government, is they're on autopilot on critical issues, including, for example, data security issues. Those cannot be afterthoughts. And we're working hard. We've hired a data privacy and security expert to advise our state government partners. We need to be on top of this, and we need to be evangelizing about this. One of the things we did with the Equifax settlement, we have $3 million for their failure to protect consumers' identity, is help encourage more training of cybersecurity professionals, particularly those who can work for state and local government, which is a real pain point that we don't have enough of them.
So I'm wondering, with the antitrust suits, they're still ongoing, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And I don't, and sort of going into, what do you hope to achieve with them, and how do you see breaking up or sort of a Facebook or a Google changing the online landscape and creating opportunities?
So let me stick with the Google case, which is the one that we're leading. There's three main forms of relief at the end of the day. One is having to provide access to key technologies or platforms. For example, Google has their own ad system management platform called SA360. In our complaint, we outline how they have engaged in deceptive and unfair and discriminatory conduct to make it harder for rivals to be treated fairly, even though they promised that they would treat everybody fairly. So an equal access remedy to critical technologies controlled by Google is one of the remedies we talk about. Number two, there's a range of contracts, contractual arrangements, that have the effect of restricting the ability of rival technologies. Think about voice-activated search technologies that could make your driving experience or other experiences seamless in terms of your search activity. They have worked very hard to make sure their search engine and their search engine alone is going to be available to you through those restrictive contracts. We want to end those sorts of contracts. And then finally, to your point, structural remedies. How could you create more room for competition by removing some choke points in the marketplace? The goal on the other side is to restore competition. When Google started as a search engine and even had sort of technologies for advertising and search, they faced more rivalry in the marketplace. The same is true in Facebook. Both of them have become dominant companies who control their respective spaces. That's not good for innovation. That's not good for consumers. We want to restore competition and encourage and enable innovation in this critical space.
One of our core advocacy, and I would like to invite anyone who has questions to go ahead and come to the microphone, and we can start questions in a moment. One of our core advocacy issues at RDR right now is to ban or severely curtail surveillance advertising in particular, because we believe that it's not only a threat to our privacy, but also to our free expression, in the sense that when vast amounts of data are being collected about us and being processed by algorithms, we are being labeled and tagged with different attributes that we're not aware of, thousands of different data points that then sort of are used to target ads towards us. And I'm wondering how, just sort of broadly, how concerned you are about the information environment we're living in, this contribution of algorithms, how it's being driven by these sort of opaque algorithms. Maybe even what do you think about the idea of algorithmic transparency, and what do you think we should do about it? You mentioned earlier a federal internet agency. I'm wondering how you conceive that agency, what it would do, and ultimately also what bearing might it have on the community here?
The point you raise around algorithmic transparency is of profound importance. I want to come back to this one about teen mental health. What I believe companies might say is, we're giving people what they want, we're keeping people more engaged. That divorces the awareness that we know exists about what is happening. I gave you the example before about teen mental health. If a young girl searches for, how do I lose weight? And the algorithm feeds up, here's how you harm yourself. Here's how you can commit suicide. That's really scary. And to your point, not transparent. So what does it mean to have audits around algorithms or transparency? I haven't figured all that out, but I do think that would be part of what an internet agency would need to look at. What is happening with respect to issues that affect mental health? Another example is obviously related to our democracy. Thomas Webster was there on January 6th, a former police officer in Mike Bloomberg's detail. He showed up in full body armor, ready to fight, and ended up committing crimes that day for the first time in his life. He was asked by the judge when he was having his hearing about getting out on a personal recognizance bond, what happened? Why did you show up? He said, I'd watched scores of videos about people like me getting attacked by the state. And I don't know if that was on Facebook or on YouTube, but that was the algorithm that was feeding somebody material that led towards dangerous conduct. We as a society should not turn a blind eye to the information that's being fed because of these algorithms. It has major consequences, and companies, again, need to be reflective on, we've talked a lot about foreign disinformation campaigns and bots. We've talked a lot about the damage that is happening. We need to think about it. Now, I am a full believer in the First Amendment. I don't want to curtail people's access to speech. I believe that the cure for speech you disagree with is more speech, and I believe in dialogue. But disinformation and algorithms that take people down a dark hole, that's not about free speech. That's harming people.
It's a deadly combination. Shall we turn to the questions? Sir?
Check. Thank you. Hi, my name is Dave Tott, and I appreciate the passion of what you just described, the algorithmic problems. I am one of the inventors of algorithms that nearly everyone in this room is using today. And sometimes I feel a great deal of responsibility for that. However, what I wanted to do is shift this question back to something that happened 20 minutes ago, which was about the broadband programs needing guidance and oversight. One of my associations is with the Internet Engineering Task Force, the IETF. This is the governing standards body for the Internet. And there have been many hundreds of RFCs published in the last decade or so that most of the broadband providers have not been following. It's generally been my hope that in this wonderful, beautiful rollout, to find someone in government that would listen to the benefits of these standards. Is there some advisory body in Colorado, or is anyone in Colorado paying any interest in what the IETF does today?
I'm very interested in what the IETF does, and I have been an admirer of internet standards bodies for a long time. So we'd love to talk more about where those opportunities are. Ideally, that's something we might provide more support for on a national level, but let's start here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Over here.
Drew, yeah, please.
Hi, hello, Phil.
Drew?
So I have a telecom and tech question, and it concerns the behavior of big telecom companies and big tech companies. And so are big tech companies and big telecom companies evil in the same way, or are they evil in a different way? And the reason I ask that is to go to the remedies for dealing with competition in all of those cases you talked about with telecom, but also the perhaps more subtle issues with the tech companies.
So I tend not to view public policy issues through the lens of religion. So I tend to avoid ever looking at companies as good companies or evil companies. I believe that companies will do what they can get away with and make money, which is why it's so important we have rules of the road and those who are engaging in oversight. And part of the challenge that Jessica has underscored is in many of these areas, there has been no oversight. This algorithmic issue we're talking about, literally, no one has been watching. And now we're looking back and saying, how did this happen exactly? And we're like, oh, I guess we should think about how these algorithms work and what their impact is. So we're way behind the curve. The difference between big telecom and big tech is we've developed, imperfect as they are, regulatory regimes for big telecom. There are some rules of the road that exist, again, imperfect as they are. Big tech, we're only at the very, I'll use the fancy word, nascent stage, beginning stage of thinking about what kind of rules of the road do we need? What kind of capacities does a internet platform agency need to deal with the challenges? And so rather than stick in religious terms, I guess I will stick more in temporal terms, which is we're at a new stage of talking about big telecom and how you oversee these broadband providers, and I'm sure we'll continue talking about things like net neutrality for years to come. But when you talk about big tech and you talk about algorithms, you talk about data collection, you talk about data portability and interoperability, we're at square one. We've barely had this conversation. And so we're just in a different place. And I don't believe one can look at this landscape and say, we should only be concerned about big telecom and have regulatory oversight of the telecoms, But we should not be concerned about these internet platforms, and we'll continue to let them have complete freedom without any public oversight.
One of the questions that, or one of the things I asked my table yesterday, because seemed to be here, and maybe this was just my table, but a consensus that broadband is a utility here in this room, which was really interesting to me because that does not feel like a consensus in other parts of the country where I live and work. And so I'm wondering, and I'm also thinking about your question, Drew. At RDR, we rank both big tech companies and what we call telco giants. And we use 58 different indicators, each of which have some sub-elements, over 300 questions, standards basically, that we've created that are grounded in human rights and the UN guiding principles on human rights, because we rank companies internationally. And what we're seeing on the telecom front is that, yes, there are more regulatory regimes, but they're also starting to engage in a lot of the behavior that big tech companies are engaging in, and that we see somewhat of an even increased threat because telecom companies already have so much of our demographic data. And so that they are kind of a rising threat with the convergence of the different technologies and between big tech and big telecom. And in November of this year, we will be launching our Telco Giant Scorecard, which will actually try and dive more deeply into this tech versus telecom sort of question as well. So it is interesting at the same time there. And we use the same indicators, I was going to say, to evaluate the telecom companies, but some of them are different in terms of practices that telcos engage in, some of them not in the United States, like zero rating and things like that, but that big tech companies, well, that one isn't, actually big tech does do that, so with the telcos. So anyway, that's a very interesting question. Sir, would you like to?
Sure. No, I think you're headed in the right direction. I think establishment of digital human rights is going to be key, because right now all our information is being farmed, it's being sold, and it actually forms a basis as to how businesses perceive a person. And I was wondering, at like HIPAA that protects your personal information, if there's any dialogue. To me, it goes way beyond the state. It goes almost global, and actually, to create an establishment of digital human rights, because so much of our lives are impacted by our presence on the internet. It seems like it's almost a necessity now to prevent what Mr. Weiser spoke about, predation, saying that, oh, we're going to give you this, but all of a sudden it turns into something completely different. And I was just wondering if there's any talk or direction or legalities that can actually establish that.
So I would encourage people, think globally like you're doing, act locally. We have, and I gave you the wrong URL, so I wanted to check it, coag.gov/ it's CPA, stands for the Colorado Privacy Act. We're looking for your engagement about this point that you've just both been riffing on. What's happening to all our data? How do we better give consumers this basic right of privacy in their data? We need your ideas on this. We need your engagement. The first step we're going to have is we're going to have rules here in Colorado that our office develops under this law. I believe that will happen before we get to a federal law. And to your point, yes, ultimately, there's an opportunity for more international awareness and commitment. A group called the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, has worked to generate some international norms around privacy. We actually started in the 1970s with something called Fair Information Privacy Practices. We had helped develop that in the US. We haven't really carried through that project, and now we're behind. Other nations have really worked more at this issue than we have. So you're right, we have a lot of work to do in this area, but let's start here in Colorado. We've got this law, we can use your help.
Scott Lingle, Eagle County Government. You spoke earlier to the illegality of internet service providers advertising or guaranteeing was the word you used, one speed and the consumers receiving something different. I think there's a lot of frustration from consumers in Colorado that speak to that very point. What's being done, and in a pragmatic world, what can individuals and local governments actually do to change this situation?
If you're able to document, we're promised, again, pick the number, I'll stick with 50 megabits per second. I never get 50 megabits per second. The most I've ever gotten is 20, and more often than not, I'm getting 10. And again, the numbers will vary. If you can document that in your community and then share the information with our office at stopfraudcolorado.gov, we can then do something. And then you can also come to me afterwards, I'll give you my card. You can come directly to my office. This is on my radar as part of our to-do work, particularly when we give businesses public money to commit to do something and they don't do it. It's obviously even greater a concern. So I recognize the concern you're talking about. There was a case in New York that was successful along these lines. I am open for your documentation for us to get on the case.
Phil, I was wondering, you were mentioning the OECD and international norms and standards, and I was wondering if you're following at all the legislation that's being developed in Europe. Europe is sort of known as being more out front in terms of digital regulation, and with the GDPR in 2018, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, and this year, the Digital Services Act and a Digital Markets Act, which is meant to do a lot more regulation of algorithms and create fines for companies. And I'm wondering if you're looking at any of that legislation for inspiration or for what not to do.
So I haven't looked closely at all of it. What I would say, and you'll see this in the Colorado Privacy Act, and you can pull up my earlier talks about it. What I worry a little bit sometimes in Europe, and I mentioned that the California Privacy Act has some of this too, when you get something which is overly prescriptive. So the danger is, and you can pick any technology policy issue, data security being an example, you have to protect your networks by doing X, Y, and Z specifically. Mm-hmm. The problem is technology will keep evolving. I'd rather identify what's the animating principle, and then you have to reasonably protect the principle, and then leave people with some discretion how they do that, and then audit them, and if they fail to do something reasonable, then hold them accountable.
That makes a lot of sense. And I also am curious, just in terms of, you mentioned auditing, enforcement, and grievance and remedy. Like, I always wonder, and I think a lot of people wonder, sort of, how do you find violators of, for example, the Colorado? I mean, I think it's incredible that if more than 500 Coloradans are affected, that is, I guess, standing for a suit against the company, which seems like a very small number of people, which is a great thing. So how is enforcement going to work, and how does grievance and remedy sort of work?
I often say our democracy is a team sport. And whether we're talking about public safety, whether we're talking about water, or whether we're talking about consumer protection and broadband, our state cannot do our work without our engaged citizens. The reason we know about CenturyLink, TurboTax, fill in the blank, Frontier Airlines, because consumers have told our office, this is what happened to me. Now, we can't take on every fraud that happens. There's all sorts of local contractors who engage in shenanigans or movers, and we will always do what we can. But if we get 500 complaints about a single company deceiving consumers, that will really get our attention. And we've worked to be as scrappy and as effective as possible to get consumers their money back, to hold businesses to account, and to make sure the consumers get what they're promised.
Great. Did you have a question? No? Are there any other questions from the audience?
Well, we got one here, but I'm going to lean on one other point, which is,
Great.
I think what I would also just underscore is all of you who are in the technology world have an extraordinary amount to offer as we in the public policy world work to improve the lives of Coloradans. There are so many different opportunities and areas. If you're able to get engaged, and one thing you're also able to do is help make these connections, you're going to make a real difference. I know that working with government can be frustrating most of the time, but I would encourage you to hang in there. Find the areas where you have something that you're passionate about, connect with the right person. There's really important work to be done.
I have a quick practical question for you, Jessica. There's a lot of people in this room who either have already established a MUNA network or have their own regional networks, and they might be unintentionally violating something that would get them on their, high on your scale. What practical advice would you give ISPs to do better?
I'll repeat the question.
Thanks.
You've got a lot of people here
Yep.
who are technology entrepreneurs operating a regional network. They may be collecting data
Yep.
and or operating in ways that they don't even realize could get them in trouble.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for operators to make sure they're being responsible and don't run afoul of these potential legal violations?
Well, thanks, Doug. So I mentioned the indicators that we have for our research methodology. It's a set of standards, and there are 3 categories: corporate governance, freedom of expression and information, and probably the most relevant one is privacy. And within our privacy indicators, and I was going to sort of outline this. They align with several provisions in the Colorado and California Privacy Acts, and we ask questions. We have a list of questions that we ask about whether people can access a privacy policy, that it's public-facing, they don't need to log in, for example. If you're running algorithms, is there an algorithmic system development policy telling people what data you're collecting to train your algorithms, and then what are you doing with that? How is user information collected and inferred? How is it shared? And is it fit for purpose? Is it just as much information as you need to collect to provide the service that you're offering? How long are you retaining it for? What control do users have over their data? Can they opt out of any targeted advertising? That may not apply here, but, and what are your security oversight practices? What data do you release about government demands? And this is less important probably in this room than it is maybe in some rooms more internationally, but what data do you release about demands for user information by the government or other third parties? How are you addressing security, or do you say how you're addressing security vulnerabilities, data breaches? Are you deploying encryption? What's your account security, et cetera? Companies are very opaque. Our methodology relies on publicly available documents, and we do not evaluate practice. We evaluate what the policy says. What does the company say that they do? But still, our standards can be used as a checklist by any company that is gathering data to sort of make sure that you are on the right side of people's privacy and data protection rights. And as an example, a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, a program at the New School in New York City used our methodology to evaluate ISPs in New York and what their privacy practices were in order to make a recommendation to the City Council for which ISPs are better at protecting user data. And I see opportunities in this room to do similar studies, either things that we could do in conjunction with Mountain Connect or with your office, or also our methodology is very adaptable and usable by yourselves as sort of a roadmap for what you should be including in your privacy policies, how you should, and sort of also extrapolating from that to what your practices should be. And so for anybody who is interested in that, I'd be more than happy to talk with you about it show you some aspects of the methodology. You can go to our website. I chose not to do slides in this presentation because I thought it would be a little cumbersome, but rankingdigitalrights.org/index2022 will pull up our most recent scorecard, and from the hamburger menu, I can't remember which side of the screen it's on right now. If you look for what it says RDR's indicators, and you will have the whole list of our indicators. And we use an international human rights framework, which may not seem as relevant, but I think it should be, because the United States is a signatory to human rights law, and the reason we use that law is because the companies that we evaluate are operating globally, and it is law. It is not simply norms. And so I'd be really more than happy to talk to anybody who's more interested in getting information about that.
Just a couple points on the value of what Jessica's doing. Another Louis Brandeis quote is, "Sunlight is among the best of disinfectants." And having a sunlight shined on practices of different companies is incredibly healthy. And back to Drew's question, again, I wouldn't use religious terms, but I would use comparative terms. Some companies are making more of an effort to be responsible about how they, fill in the blank, manage data, evaluate the impact of their algorithms, evaluate the impact on kids, et cetera, et cetera. It's really important that we all are working to understand and support groups like Jessica that are putting the spotlight on that. In our office, we, as I said, take very seriously the public engagement to us as to what concerns happen. I'll give you a quick example in a different sector. After the pandemic, when a lot of flights got canceled, the Department of Transportation said, you can't keep people's money for flights that didn't happen because of a public health emergency. You have to give them refunds or credits. Well, one company found a way to really undermine people's access to those credits. That was Frontier Airlines. We got more complaints about Frontier Airlines than any other business during the pandemic. And we've pushed the Department of Transportation to protect consumers. Unfortunately, I don't have that authority the Department of Transportation does to make sure that they don't get away with cheating people out of their credits. So consumers have rights. They should speak up. We should call out what responsible action looks like and what less responsible action looks like.
And I think as another example, if you look at, and I'm not making any value judgments about Apple versus Google here, but Apple has differentiated itself in the public marketplace by saying it is first on privacy, right? It is using that as a message. And we see our rankings and the evaluations that we do and the transparency, that we're really a transparency-focused organization, as Phil mentioned, as a way of differentiating your company from another company by saying that you are securing privacy expression and have better corporate governance than others.
And let me just lead it down the following way. I know we mentioned this before, issues like data security, how you manage, protect your data, data privacy, what you disclose to customers can be like a pain sometimes. But building trust with your customers, it pays great dividends. Also, we have a data breach law in Colorado. If something happens, come to us right away and say, I had a data breach, what are my requirements? The companies who've gotten in trouble with our office, it's rarely that the data breach happens. It's that they've gone to great lengths to lie about it, to obfuscate about it, and to leave their customers in harm's way where they could have been coming clean and trying to fix the problem.
It's never the act, it's the cover-up, right?
That's what they say.
Well, I think we're out of time. Phil, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to speak with you, and hopefully